But we've got some other big news today in relation to that Sydney outbreak. Andrew Clennell, our political editor, is with me now. And Andrew, you've got some really interesting news, some breaking news as to the source of all of this. Talk us through the details.
Now, there's been a lot of focus, Kieran, on this unvaccinated driver of air crews and how he wasn't vaccinated and has passed on the virus. There appears to have been a major failure here by the New South Wales Government. My information is the public health orders governing this driver meant that there was no requirement for vaccination of that driver, and there was no requirement for that driver even to wear a mask, Kieran. That is my information. I want to repeat that again. The public health orders drawn up in December last year in order to cover the drivers of aircrew who at that time were forced to quarantine in New South Wales did not contain a provision to force the driver to vaccinate, did not contain a provision to force the driver to wear a mask. That driver did not even have to wear a mask under the New South Wales rules. The only provision I can find in that public health order is that the drivers had to regularly COVID test. Gladys Berejiklian and Brad Hazzard were asked about this driver today, and Brad Hazzard sought to evade the question.
This all started a week ago from one bloke, a hire car driver who wasn't vaccinated. Why wasn't he vaccinated, and have the police gone anywhere with their investigation as to whether he was wearing a mask, and are they going to fine him?
The limousine driver has been very helpful from my perspective in the sense that he's helped the health team, the tracers, to do all that we needed to do. Anything beyond that in terms of enforcement are matters for the police.
But in all seriousness, people in Sydney are now having significant impediments put on their lives thanks to one gentleman who was allowed to pick up aircrew while he was not vaccinated. Why wasn't he vaccinated?
I've answered the question, and I've also said that...
Well, why wasn't he? You haven't answered the question.
I've answered the question.
So we've got severe restrictions on Sydney, an inability of people to travel on school holidays, border closures throughout the country, because the New South Wales Government, it seems, did not have a public health order in place requiring this driver to wear a mask or be vaccinated. Some real questions there for the New South Wales Government. Chris Minns, the New South Wales opposition leader, he wasn't buying into this when he spoke to Ashley Gillen. He's determined to be as bipartisan as it can be with the popular Gladys Berejiklian on the pandemic. But I'll tell you what, he wants to get stuck into this issue.
What's your take on the driver at the centre of all of this? He was unvaccinated, as we know. Is that good enough? Surely it's a failing.
Well, look, I mean, again, I've spoken to the Health Minister and the Chief Health Officer about that. I understand that changes have been made in relation to the transportation of, in particular, airline crew to and from places of accommodation. It's a finely balanced thing, but given the complexity of the COVID response, we're not in a position, and I'm not going to slam the Premier or the Health Minister. Generally speaking, it has been an exemplary response to the COVID pandemic.
Well, Chris Minns, he might want to reconsider that particular strategy, because the people of Sydney are not going to be very happy at the situation here with the New South Wales Government not putting in a public health order a requirement for this driver of air crews to even wear a mask. You heard that question before from Chris O'Keefe from Channel 9. Will the driver be fined? I dare say not, given that those requirements weren't even in the public health order. So Mark Butler, he was trying to lay some blame for this at Scott Morrison's feet. I can assure you the public health orders in relation to this are New South Wales. They are state government responsibilities, not the federal responsibility. Let's hear from Scott Morrison. Let's hear that. Mark Butler.
The front line in protecting Australians from COVID are our borders, are making sure that anyone coming back from overseas or airline crews are quarantined from the rest of the Australian population. And it seems to me logical that frontline workers, including people ferrying airline crews from airports to hotels, should be vaccinated and should be wearing masks. And it's really for the Prime Minister to explain why that hasn't been the case, given that international borders are his responsibility.
Now, I said yesterday I was puzzled Gladys Berejiklian was holding a mask during the press conference yesterday when she was enforcing a mask mandate and not putting it off and on between questions. Perhaps my comments shamed the Premier into action, because here she was setting a much better example today, as was Brad Hazzard and Kerry Chant. Kieran.
Why won't you consider a lockdown at this point?
Because we've always said, and we've considered all the options, but we've always said we won't burden our citizens unless we absolutely have to. We know basically where the super spreading events have been. We know where the virus is circulating. And look, we don't want to take any further action than what we have now, but this relies on all of us reining in our behaviour, all of us following the health orders that are coming into place from 4 p.m. I'm not ruling out any further action, but I'm also confident that if we adhere to the health orders today, we will have a good chance in getting on top of this outbreak.
So New South Wales Government sources have told me, Kieran, that they are not keen on going to lockdown. Local lockdowns, I guess, would be an initial step. It's the new measures and assess how they go. But there is, and I quote, a very high concern in the New South Wales Government about this outbreak. So let's see where we end up, Kieran.
They've been praised for being the best government and health authorities in responding, but this is a massive oversight to not have one of those drivers, or to have drivers not required to wear masks when they're ferrying international crew. Inexplicable. Hard to imagine how that was allowed to be included within a public health order. And if that ends up being the crack within which we see another outbreak, and possibly, we hope not, but possibly one of the worst in New South Wales. As I say, we hope that's not the case, but what an oversight that is. Huge news from Andrew Clennell in finding that within that public health order today. Let's hear from Mark McGowan. He's also taking this very seriously, as you would imagine. Here he is, the WA Premier.
So this is very unfortunate. We don't take any pleasure in this. This will no doubt cause a lot of trouble for people both from here and from interstates holiday plans, but New South Wales is obviously undergoing a serious outbreak, and we can't run the risk of that being imported into Western Australia. So we took health advice this morning, we watched the numbers this morning, and we've made this decision. It's a difficult decision. We don't enjoy this. Obviously we were hoping we're out of this environment, but unfortunately New South Wales is going through something serious, so we have to take action as a consequence.
I think by now most people would have realised that the situation in New South Wales is deteriorating. There are additional exposure sites, and of course the number of new infections has increased. Dr. Emily Kirkpatrick has recently attended the AHPPC meeting, which has been held. We have far more detail regarding the spread of the situation in New South Wales, and I announce now that effective immediately we'll put level 6 restrictions in place for New South Wales. Now we are putting in addition to that, a 100-kilometre buffer along the border, so this will be a great relief to people in places like Wentworth, people in Broken Hill, but for the remainder of the state we put those level 6 restrictions in place, effective immediately.